Hi, and welcome to the When Women Fly podcast. Each episode, I have poignant conversations with women who fly, run, surf, ski, climb, or otherwise soar, and possess a passion for life that is infectious. These are honest and insightful conversations about dreams and reinvention, often in the face of uncertainty, doubt, or other impediments. We talk about busting paradigms, grit, working hard, and playing hard, all while building a community around the empowering metaphor of flight. I am your host, Sylvia Winter, a pilot, runner, mother, skier, list maker, and apparently podcaster. I believe that when we share our stories, own our fears, and dismantle our perceived limitations, the possibilities are boundless. Whether you're pursuing your passion or simply love the idea of possibility and wonder, this podcast is for you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let's get started. In this season of When Women Fly, we are proud to share our platform with courageous and inspiring female figures who are making a difference in the outdoor sport industry and the world at large. I am grateful and inspired by all the remarkable women that I get to connect with and interview. They are shaping a new narrative daily, and they show us anything is possible with tenacity, creativity, and purpose. This month of March is Women's History Month, and International Women's Day is March 8th, which was the precursor to Women's History Month. We are going to lean into stories of community and talk to women who are deeply involved in creating, nurturing, and growing communities. The common thread is a belief that collective energy and action can change the world and creates a dream of a positive vision by creating network, providing support, and empowerment. Community is all about relationships. What makes a successful movement and a viable community? I talked this month with women who have stories to tell about building community and turning a fun idea, a motion, into a movement. My guests are changemakers. These conversations evolve around a central purpose to reflect the creativity that is inherent in activism today. We celebrate Women's History Month in this way to bore into the cooperative mentality, dig into what the DNA of collective energy in communities looks like, and converge thoughts and perspectives on what it takes to uplift and energize women and all humans. Because groups can both foster support and confidence and also flame a sense of possibility that proves to be critical in creating and reaching dreams, we are better together. Let's not be quiet. Let's celebrate a positive vision for females in aviation, sport, activism, academia, and all the fields. In episode 6 with Bethany Miller, I ask how she envisions navigating through the COVID period and the challenges of the pandemic. And she planted this thought for me that community would be our way through it. And to foster community, we need to imagine and facilitate communities that are built on the values of being seen and known, supported and encouraged, expanded and stretched, grounded and safe. My guest today is Carolyn Gardner. Carolyn is the Volée Team Manager at Oiselle. She is a community builder with a passion for facilitating opportunities for athletes to develop and succeed through supportive relationships. To set up this conversation, I need to frame Oiselle, the female-based by women, for women athletic apparel company. And really, I need to give a very brief history of how Oiselle fits into the culture of sponsors in female running, and why we, female runners at any level, dream for a better future and a positive vision for athletes in this sport, especially on an elite level. Although I would assert that the way elites are treated has a direct impact on the general public in the sport. November 2019, a moment that will mark a great reveal in running and in women's sports history. The New York Times published an opinion piece by Mary Cain. I was the fastest girl in America until I joined Nike. Mary Cain's male coaches were convinced she had to be thinner and thinner and thinner. Then her body started to break down. In 2013, Cain became the youngest American track and field athlete to make a world championship team. In the article, she described the pressures of the all-male Oregon Project staff and what they put on her to become thinner in order to perform better. Cain said she was weighed in front of her teammates and publicly shamed for not hitting the goals he demanded. allegations that were later confirmed by former members of the group. The emotional abuse went beyond Kane, and others also spoke out. Nike has earned a poor reputation when it comes to supporting women as more than athletic machines that help sell product. It is hard to jog a conversation with a runner who doesn't harbor a complexity of feelings about Nike, their shoes, technological doping, women's health, and more. To credit the change where it happens, Nike did launch a maternity clothing line in 2020. You can go down the rabbit hole with Nike and running, but the relevance here is that Nike has a history of problems when it comes to women's rights and women's health and sponsorship. And this is important because of the power Nike has in the sport. Nike and one other sponsor fund over half of USA track and field. And with an agreement renewed 6 years ago, the relationship will be in place until 2040. This is not a donation. It is a paid sponsor rights agreement. The logo rules maintain Nike's position as the dominant player in track and field. And so Nike purchased not only the exclusive right to be the featured brand at the US track and field events, but also the right to reduce the branding of any other competitors. So all world-class athletes are bound to wearing a swoosh, and other brand sponsors, such as Oiselle, are silenced in a no visibility zone. Is Nike a bully? Again, yours to explore, but let's get back to Oiselle. In walks Oiselle. Founder and CEO Sally Bergeson started a women-owned and fashioned running apparel company named Bird, in French, the feminine of oiseau. This business would allow her to combine two great passions in life, running and design. She was obsessed with creating more flattering apparel, but just like Nike had done before, she wanted Oiselle to be about more than the product. She wanted it to embody the spirit of running, that connectedness that we all feel when we run and move, she said, and the sisterhood of empowerment. Sally Bergeson hasn't been successfully intimidated. I personally find the impact of Oiselle and the voices amplified within are even more critical because of the twisted priorities of Nike and the questionable ethics behind female athlete sponsorship. The contrast is revealing and striking. Oiselle believes our voices have power, and they do. Another needle shifted in 2019 when Nike finally contractually provided maternal protection to the female athletes they sponsor for the first time, a gesture roused by public pressure. Women are more than athletes. Lauren Fleshman signed with Oiselle while she was pregnant, and she tweeted, "It was made clear to me that pregnancy would result in zero pay from Nike until I returned to form. It was the thing that helped me clearly see a pattern of problems. I signed with the feminist brand Oiselle, who walks the walk. Take notes, industry." Again, the contrast is revealing and striking. The maternity, doping, shoes, these are hot topics in women running sports. Oiselle is focused and adheres to the mission. The relatively small company has continued to gain momentum and given women alternatives in clothing and culture, from the elite runners and emerging runners to the thousands and thousands of women who break a sweat and love to run. And this is where Carolyn Gardner, my guest today, and the Volée team come in. In 2015, Oiselle spawned a new program called Volée, a French word meaning flight, flock, blast, volley, swarm, which is made of a coterie of women nearing 4,000 who join in connection and community with one another, using running as a common thread, moreover, becoming so much more about friendship and networking. The umbrella company also has emerging an elite team, which together with the Volée creates a lot of positive energy in the thick of it. Oiselle supports women through highs and lows, cycles and setbacks, and has become vocal about clean sport, inclusion and diversity, social justice, and activism. Carolyn talks about the magic in building community and sisterhood, the role of social media, taking a fun idea and making it a movement, and her passion to create a powerful network for all runners, from beginners to professionals, from roads to trails and the track. Carolyn is a self-identified extrovert, and she clearly embodies a passion for merging storytelling, running, and friendship. I began by asking Carolyn to introduce herself.
All right. Well, as I said, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and especially on a podcast that really amplifies the stories of women. My name is Carolyn Gardner. I'm based in Seattle, Washington, which is still a little funny for me to get used to saying because I've only lived here for just under a year. I'm originally a Chicago native, and as you mentioned, I am the Volée Team Manager for Oiselle. And so basically, my role is to manage and oversee the community of women that we have that's associated with our brand. And that community is called the Volée.
And a little bit more about your background. Where did you grow up?
I'm actually from Chicago, just a regular, typical Chicagoan life, blue collar family, loved all things sports, suburban life, you name it, that was kind of our lifestyle. I always had a love for sports, even though I was quite clumsy, let's just say to put it. I was a little challenged in the hand-eye coordination, but I had a deep love for the element of sport and for team sports. So even though I didn't maybe play as a child, I was always the first one that was out there cheering. I was the nerd, I'll be honest. I was the nerd in junior high when you would decorate your lockers at school. And mine was filled with like sports teams and baseball players and cool women that were doing things versus like all of the teeny bopper magazines. So that was me. I was just like entrenched with sports as the support and the cheerleader.
Yeah. I share the growing up in the Chicago suburbs with you, and I can definitely attest to the fact that being into sports is a valid interest, right? Participating and also just being part of that culture, Midwestern sports are a good thing, some good soul in there. That's really neat. I didn't quite realize that we had that connection. So some people listening may have some idea of the importance of running communities in general, but tell us a little bit more about your background and what inspired you to be a leader in developing and facilitating this Volée team, which we'll talk more about. But first, sort of what really got you inspired to be a community builder in the sport of running?
It's very interesting. If I stop and look back, I would have never thought this is where I would land, even like during my college years. That just wasn't even on my radar. But one thing that was consistent throughout my life is the need to be around people and getting energy from people. And not just people, but like good people, people that fill your soul. I'm definitely an extrovert through and through. And so I feed off of good energy and learning from people and understanding kind of the dichotomy of what makes everyone tick. I thrive off of that. So in right after college, when you reach that point in your life where you just can't keep eating all the things you wanted to eat and you just need like a different kind of release, I started running. And mostly because it was free, it was accessible, it was something I didn't think I needed to learn how to do. You kind of go into it with that naivete like, "Oh, this is easy. It's no big deal. Everyone's out on the Chicago lakefront doing that. I can get out there with them." But little did I know the power behind it and the sense of community and the sense of accomplishment that it can bring. And I remember going to my first race. It was just a little community race, a little 5K. And just that feeling of, oh my gosh, I just ran 3 miles by myself. I finished it. And from there was no looking back. And from that, how does that get to a community? I mean, a lot of people can run, and that doesn't necessarily create that linear path. But, I kind of was dabbling and wanted to know more about what I was doing and about the sport and just dig into it as a participant. I went to a local running store. Again, this was a long time ago. We've come a long way, but I went to a local running store and they had their community run. And I'll be honest, I walked in there and I was really intimidated and for very good reason. I just didn't really fit in. I didn't feel comfortable. People were just like in their own little groups. But back then, a lot of the running store runs and communities were for fast runners or more for team sport. They were competing and they were meeting to go on their training runs. There wasn't really a space for just a social runner or not one that I knew of. And I knew from that minute that I stepped into that door, I was like, this isn't right, but there's more that can be done. And there is something out there. I just have to find it. And through different running for charities and, just finding different paths, I landed with Girls in the Run in Chicago. And through that, I actually served on their board for 5 years because I just loved everything about the community, what they were giving back. All of these values that they held were actually personal values that I had. And they were able to bring that in to combine that with running and the empowerment of running. And through that, I got to meet a lot of people in the Chicago running community. It ends up being a very small circle. And right about that time, community and social sports were really starting to pick up. And you would see a lot of community programs based around running. And I actually was able to jump in with another brand and really entrench myself into bringing that community together and meeting for runs and setting up a program within that space for people to learn how to run with other people, and not just the physicality of doing it, but the support systems and the mental release and all of those good endorphins that come with that. And so when the time came or when I moved to Los Angeles, it just so happened a few months later the position opened up or it's a volunteer position, opened up within the Volée community. They were creating leader systems and they wanted someone to help lead that group and just plan meetups and various activities. Again, it was just kind of starting out. So it was very organic. And I jumped at that opportunity because I love that was the one thing about the Chicago running community that I loved. Like I was able to get in there and all those things that I craved, I was able to make it happen with the others. And so I wanted to reproduce that in a really fun way in Los Angeles. It was love at first sight, and the love fest just went on and on for the brand with Oiselle. And so, they were bringing really great things to the community and allowing us to kind of put our spin on it, whatever our runners needed and our women were craving. And there was no looking back after that.
So, to take a half a step backwards to frame what you're talking about, for those who don't know, Oiselle is the Seattle based company for women athletic apparel. And I love the taglines based on, I'm going to quote here, the apparel company always loves to go fast, take chances. And I'd be really curious what that means to you. Our mission is threefold: make great product, improve the sport, and build the sisterhood. When that third tenet, I think, is in your hood. So Oiselle's the company. Volée is what is in your domain, which is the sisterhood part of it, just to connect the dots a little bit. So you, when you were in LA, became a regional leader, I'll call it, a team leader. And that was sort of your foray into the company and probably then really falling in love with that mission of supporting women in this sport in a very holistic way, I would say, which is unique.
And I think the thing that is really unique is they bring the Volée is kind of the glue that holds a lot of those tenets and entities of the brand together. Meaning, we do have emerging athletes, we do have professional sport athletes that the brand represents. And then as a team, we kind of pull all of that support together. And as a regional leader, you can connect those efforts together. One thing about the Volée, I hope I'm not jumping ahead a little bit, but the program itself, it is a membership based program, but a good chunk of that membership goes back, is a give back. And so we give back to our philanthropic projects that the company has. And one of them is to support emerging athletes. So we are able to take women that might be qualifying for the Olympic trials, whether in some form of track and field, there's, a wide variety there. And so our membership fees go to help support those women. And so, as a regional leader, one of my favorite things is I would get to do is have like a meetup where we could go learn about what they were doing, with that pro. And then whenever they would have an event in our area, we could go out as a team and we could support them and cheer them. And that was a really cool, full circle moment.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting model for sponsorship. And I'm certainly not immersed in apparel, so I don't know if this is done with other brands, but I can certainly say that was what Oiselle is doing is really unique, and the fact that this membership team is also part of bringing the elite athletes, sponsoring them, giving them what they need in order to excel in a sport that we all share is really exciting.
Yeah, and you were asking like what does that mission go fast take chances mean? What does that mean to me? It really means like just try to do the things that might challenge you. And not only challenge you from a physical way, but challenge you from meeting a new person, understanding like somebody else's lifestyle. And it could be from a standpoint of where they live. It could be a standpoint of what's going on in their life. It could be a standpoint of their professional life, that professional networking. And the thing that's unique about the Volée is we can bring all of those assets of people's lives. I like to call them like the different identifiers of your life. We all have that common thread of running, but as individuals, we all have these other facets of our life. And the Volée can bring us all together where we can not only talk about and support running, but we can talk about how to uplift other women in all different facets of their life. And I think the thing that sets us apart is that, and we aren't an ambassador group. There's a lot of other brands. You're asking about brands, and a lot of brands have ambassador programs, which are great, and they support the brand. But this is a completely separate side of our business. Yes, people may come to the brand because they love the product. We try hard not to like intertwine those two sides of the business. So the Volée isn't there to promote our product. The Volée is there to be a resource for women in the running community to make friends, to find support system, all those things you crave as an adult athlete.
That is distinctly different, and it is I think it's worth really defining, making sure we define it well. So when people ask you, "What is Volée?" Why would they join? What would they get out of it? How do you answer that?
It's a really loaded question because, of course, I'm filled with all of these like great things you can get out of it. But I would say it's a collective of fitness minded women because we lead with running, but there are also triathletes. There are also, different forms of track and field swimmers. We just go back to it's a collective of women looking to network, looking to make friendships, looking to support other women and to find that support as well.
And the transformative power of sport, what does that mean to you?
Oh gosh, there's nothing better than crossing a finish line. And that finish line can look different to people. That finish line can just be some kind of goal. But I remember, like I was talking about that first 5K, but I also remember my first marathon and that feeling of crossing the finish line and how amazing it felt, but also the journey it took to get there. And for me, that journey was even more impactful and more powerful than that actual finish line. That's where the transformation took place. Every time I would reach a new goal or learn something new or make a new friend, it just like kept me going and made me want more, a little more. And I could see the transformation because then you can bring it on to other aspects of your life. Maybe once you realize I can do this in that sport, some type of new trait you learn or new skill or new stroke or whatever it is, the next time you may be say in a professional environment and someone says, "Hey, will you prepare this presentation?" And you don't normally, maybe you wouldn't have thought that you could speak in front of a group of people. You wouldn't have been able to find your voice. But because you have the strength and the courage to take chances in other aspects in your sport, sometimes I've seen that give that fuel to do that, professionally or in other aspects of your life.
Yeah, I think it's transferable. The process, what we learn through the process that's involved in sport is very transferable to other challenges and things that bring us a lot of joy as well. So 2020 was when you actually came on board and to Oiselle, and it brought all sorts of surprises. Can we talk a little bit about 2020 and COVID and the impact that it had, the forced adaptation, what benefits that brought in some ways, those pivots that you were forced to embrace through a lot of virtual events, and then how you imagine 2021 unfolding?
Yeah, 2020. There's a lot of times you want to have pause when you say 2020 because there's so much that carries. But I also think, when I got to the end of the year, there was a lot of really great things we learned from 2020. And one of that being the power of virtual connection. And yes, I know there are probably people listening that are saying, oh, Zoom fatigue. Oh, I just miss hugging. I miss all this. And I agree, all of that. There's nothing better than in real life connection. But the power of virtual connection is something that a pivot that I didn't expect to have to take. But in the end, I learned the true power and the true value of it. And so really explain that without being so vague, when we started 2020, we were going into an Olympic year. And as I was talking about, we tend to plan our events for our team, our statewide and global events around different running activities. They may be a major marathon, they may be events that are high level athletes are going to be participating in. And with it being an Olympic year last year, we had plans to do things in at the Boston Marathon to support athletes and bring our Volée team together. And then in Eugene at the Olympic trials, as people were getting ready to face the challenges of if they would qualify for the Olympics in track and field. And then we were going to have other things in the fall. Obviously, all that just went right out the window and you had to reinvent yourself. And so we had two great learnings from that this year, or two great examples of learnings. One, we started the year off and it had nothing to do with COVID. It was already planned in place. We literally started on January 1st with a new platform to virtually connect people. Because our team is so big, we realized we need some kind of platform for people to talk. And, your usual suspects like Facebook or some of the other programs just were too big to be able to manage in a space like that. And there's also a lot of outside noise in some of those social media networks. And so we wanted something that was our own. So we built this out. We spent a year building it out and launched it on January 1st. Little did we know that would be the saving grace to our team. Because in that space and with it being, an exclusive space for our teammates, we were able to tweak it and do anything we wanted to in that space. So we were able to create virtual connections. We were able to create virtual events. We were able to literally build community on a large scale in smaller groups. We have team groups. So like you were talking about the regional in real life meetups that we would have, we could do that virtually in small group settings. We could also have like larger events for our full team. We have a space where you can talk about anything from your training to what you're cooking, what you're reading, all these different talking points. Again, to bring in all the different identifiers of your life. And then we also have affinity groups. So women of color, they have a space to go talk, a private space from the outside noise. We have a space for LGBTQ and sober runners. And they can also come together in community and talk about the things without kind of the 2 cents from everyone else that can't relate. So that is one example of how we were really able to pivot and maximize on that virtual connection. And another one is an event that we had in the early fall called Women Run the Vote. And that was actually supposed to be an in real life relay in leading up to the election. And so what it was is we were going to run literal in real life relay from Atlanta to Washington D.C. in the hopes of raising money for an organization. Well, when we weren't able to do that, we couldn't just let it go. We couldn't say, "Oh well, it was a nice thought." And so we partnered up with another organization called Run for All Women, and we were able to take it virtual. And that was the best thing that ever happened because instead of just being a group of maybe a few hundred women running this relay, raising some money, we were able to expand to 10,000 participants in this virtual relay, raising $270,000. It wasn't just the Volée, it was, maybe friends, an extension. And then the women from Run for All Women, that running organization, they were able to help us tell stories and curate stories of the route that we chose from Atlanta to Washington, D.C., and stories about Black women that just paved the way, about voting rights, about different communities along the way. And we were able to take something that was a really fun idea and make it a movement. And it was one of the most powerful things I've been able to be involved in. So those are just two examples of, even though 2020 looked completely different, we had some major wins, and that was all because of virtual connection. So I definitely think I've learned that there's power in that, and we can take some of that learnings as we start to, hopefully, later this summer, bring in those in real life connections, because you can't replace that. You can't really replace the bond of running with your friend side by side, for that 10-mile run. But we also don't want to lose track of the really cool connections you can make with somebody that lives across the state from you that you may not be able to go for a run with.
Or even across the country, or I mean, even globally, your reach is now can be not even limited to the United States. I love the community building examples that have come out of this last year that are just gonna make our life when we can both do in-person and virtual so much richer and so much more expansive, I think. I will I'll chime in with my own experience with the Volée team. I, quite frankly, didn't know much about it. I knew that Oiselle was just a slam dunk awesome women-run company that sponsored women runners that had a different type of attitude, and I was really interested and attracted to those runners individually, but also just the culture, and maybe that's a good segue for us to talk about that. Also, sort of the current events and how Oiselle and the Volée team are so passionate about being part of the conversation of social justice and really seeing the opportunities for better equality standards in the running community. So, speak to us about that and about how Oiselle has really taken this on. And Sally Bergeson is obviously worth mentioning here and her leadership. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it from the perspective of the real team builder.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely at the heart and soul of everything that we do, is what can we do to make running an inclusive space for all athletes? And, you do see that a lot within our emerging athletes and our professional athletes. And we try to get a variety of athletes. We don't want to be just like that fast white woman of that running used to be, or the fast white male. And that's what used to be the representation of sport. But that's not really who is out there, as the social runner. And that was a big reason why we partnered with, for Run for All Women, the charity. I forgot to mention the charity that we raised $270,000 for was Black Voters Matter, because that was something that was, again, in our core, within our core values, to not only amplify but support marginalized people. And that was just one way that we could do that, and one example of, the power that we can bring to the sport, and we can change it. All of our collective efforts as runners, 10,000 runners, were able to raise $270,000. And so I think, to be specific about the Volée, yes, we have conversations all the time. We have a monthly book club. It started as a Women of Color book club, but it's kind of transformed a little bit. So we kind of started out talking about anti-racism and social justice issues, and now we're really just focusing on women of color that are authors or their stories. And so every month, someone in that group hosts a book. They pick a book from either, women of color author or their story, and we read it. And then whoever is available and wants to, we come together and we talk about it. And we literally talk about the reason behind it and those hard stories. Again, we don't shy away from having the hard conversations. We also just went through last week a training session for all of our leaders, our Volée leaders, and we go deep on diversity, equity, and inclusion and how they can do that within their space. Kind of our theme for that training session was inclusion. So, what can we do? And it's not just about amplifying voices or reading the books or sitting in all the sessions. It's what can you do actively? How can you participate? Maybe that's raising funds, doing volunteer work within your community. It might even be something as simple as making sure that your runs are in places that are accessible to everyone. Is it only in a space where maybe a white person feels safe to run? Are you only running at night after work, but maybe that mom can't go there because they have to find childcare and that's another expense for them? Are we rotating our running meetups? And so that they're in places that are accessible to everyone. And that's been something we've really, really made an effort to dig into this year and being very, very mindful of that we're doing that when we're doing things, when we're setting up the language that we're using, the communication that we're using. And, another really, really exciting effort that we're doing is we just brought on Allison Desir. I think like her official day might not be until next week, but she's joining us at Oiselle with an official role as director of advocacy. And she will be part of her role, will be working with the Volée so that we can keep those conversations going. We can keep doing collective social justice work and learning and expand, kind of getting out of our bubbles and expanding and learning about other people and cultures.
And you personally host a video series, podcast series, where you profile women in interviews that help give a platform for women to tell their stories. And I feel a great affinity towards you in that project. We share a lot in common with the intent of that. But one of the remarkable aspects of that for me in this podcast, for instance, has been how the collective of the voices amounts to a sort of force and an energy that is more than the sum of parts. And my observation is that you can relate to that in the sense of a movement. And even in the way that you described the movement about the voting, right? And sort of it became this whole thing that was so much more about this collective energy and the movement. And I'm wondering if you can reflect on that part of it being a collective and a movement and more than the single voices, but the sort of that layering of those voices.
It goes back to we move our bodies and we run. And now we can do it for good and we can do it for purpose. Yes, there is purpose and there is complete value in doing something for yourself, meeting that new goal or trying that new workout that might be hard and that sense of accomplishment. But when you're doing it with a purpose, a collective force of women behind you with that are bringing along voices that you may not have heard and voices that represents communities that you may not have been aware of. There's so much power in that meaning and in that truth that it makes you push forward with even more energy. And that's kind of where I see like it transforms into a movement and it becomes, yes, it's about your actual physicality and you taking that step. But when you add the different layers onto it, it makes you more invested and more involved, and then you wanna see what happens. You've developed relationships, that's how relationships are. The more you, like, get to know someone, then you wanna know how the story turned out, and then you wanna know the next story, and pretty soon you're learning about a whole community that you had no idea because you just went for a run virtually or it literally with somebody new.
Yeah, it's really neat. And it's actually a really great segue to talking about some of the symbolism of Oiselle. And so Oiselle, the word spelled Oiselle, is a somewhat antiquated French word for feminine word for bird, oiseau. It's similar to aviatrix, which is not really used very much, unfortunately. Most of the time we use aviator. So it's sort of your company and the choice that Sally made to name the company Oiselle was sort of reclaiming the feminine. I love that because we use that aviatrix and Oiselle is sort of consistent with that. But the other aspect which I love about Oiselle is the symbol of flying and flight. And the website, for instance, talks about metaphorically how powerful it is to have that sense of freedom that flight offers. And it talks about the feeling of weightlessness and being an athlete and running and that feeling of the legs going so fast and the heart beating and just basically just being completely alive and free. So, as a pilot and as the host of When Women Fly podcast, I am just really interested in what that symbology means of the symbology of the bird, the winged bird, what that metaphor means to you personally. And then I want to ask you if any of you fly.
Okay, so I will touch on the flying. We do have a couple pilots, but we need to dig into that more. And I'm going to make you hold me accountable to that because I know they're out there, but we haven't dug into that more. And I know there's a couple. So we need to get everyone together. But going back to the concept of flying, I'll be honest, being a Midwestern gal, I was not, birds were not on my radar. The birds we saw in Chicago were probably dirty and not like beautiful to look at. And there weren't a lot of birders, but I've learned to appreciate like the beauty of the aviary and the differences. What I do love is the kind of the metaphor of a bird and a bird taking flight and kind of like how you were talking about. But how I correlate that is not necessarily my individual journey because when you think of a bird, I think of a flock of birds. I think of birds flying together. Rarely do you see birds like on their own. They're either finding a way to find their friends, to fly, they're going somewhere together. And one thing we've really leaned into, I actually wrote a blog on the website a few weeks back, is about birds. There's that whole proverb of birds of a similar feather fly together. But the reality is, and one thing we learned in 2020 is you don't want all the same birds all the time. You want there to be some different feathers in there because you're going to go further and farther when you have the different support mechanisms. And so that's kind of what I envision when I think of birds in flight. I think of the power of the collective birds taking off and migrating and being a force. You can't stop that collective of birds together. When there's that flock, there's a lot of power behind that, and there's no stopping it. And everyone just stops it all and wonder to see where they're going to go and what they're going to do next. And that's how I envision flight. And that's why I embrace working at this team and working in this community so much.
And it does speak to that, what we were speaking of before, the sense of a movement being more than the sum of the parts. But yeah, I mean, as you were talking about that, I'm just envisioning these times of seeing these flocks and, they're clearly have intent, but it's kind of a collective intent, which is really a beautiful thing. Yeah, it's neat. I'd love to sort of dig deeper into that with you all because I feel that there is another layer of flight, and I don't know, I just think why not? I mean, okay, my bias is I'd love to have more female pilots out there, so I think that there are, but a lot, you can't be it if you can't see it, and I think, you don't have to be a commercial pilot to be a pilot, and it opens up so much of the world and of opportunities to be able to fly, and it's just so darn awesome too. Carolyn, I think we're moving into the home stretch, but I would love to ask you some sort of bigger questions about yourself. What have been some of the biggest challenges that you have had to overcome related to your pursuits or your career?
So we talked a lot about what I like to do personally, running and volunteering in that sport. But professionally, I worked in real estate and community management for about 18 years. And in community management, you do everything from manage a structure and, the fun assets of buildings and how they tinker and work to the business side of it and the financials. But most importantly, what you do is you manage the people. And so I've had to learn and overcome over the many years of how to work with people and how to be a solution provider and not just a problem solver. And I think that's one of the biggest obstacles I had to overcome is not just being out there telling people maybe what was wrong with something and what they needed to do, but provide a pathway, provide that solution in that big picture. And I think once I did that, I learned how to use my voice as a woman, and get things done. And also build relationships. Then you can build the trust. And I think trust is like the key to any relationship, whether it's professional or personal. And so I think once I kind of got through that and evolved and learned kind of that emotional intelligence side of business, then I just felt like, okay, now the doors have opened up. Now I can use all this energy that I have in these ideas. I figured out how to make them come to life.
And where do you draw your inspiration and motivation from?
Oh gosh, from people, people I surround myself with. It might be people professionally, like we were talking about Allison Desir. She's truly amazing. It's people I work closely with, like Sarah Lesko and, of course, Sally Bergeson. I mean, who could not be inspired by her? But it's also a lot of people on my team. Not only when I see them doing really cool things athletically and pursuits that they wanted to hit and meet, or they don't, and you can offer them support, but just like the everyday friendships, going on the walks with my best friend and her new little babies, or different people in your everyday life. That's actually who I tend to draw most of my inspiration from.
Mhm. As you said at the beginning of this conversation, you are truly an extrovert through and through. Okay, so Carolyn, I mentioned before that you have a video podcast and you do something in that which I actually don't typically do, which is rapid fire, quick fire questions. So I thought I love trying new things and you're a super person to try it with. So first thing that comes to mind, are you a morning runner or an evening runner?
Oh, 100% morning.
Sunrise.
Yep.
And what is your favorite post-run meal?
Breakfast burritos. That is definitely a trait I picked up living in Southern California. There's nothing better than a breakfast burrito with avocado, black beans, and salsa.
What and where on what land is your favorite run?
I will say when I lived in Los Angeles, I lived right off the water. I live like 5 blocks from the Pacific Ocean. And there's nothing that beats that. Running into, like, in your view of the mountains, the Santa Monica Mountains, that will forever be my favorite run.
It's awesome. What is your favorite Oiselle gear? It's like picking your favorite child.
I know it really is. I mean, I'm gonna have to go with the fan favorite fly out. I think I have every piece of fly out possible, but the fabric is just so adaptable to any weather.
Perfect. What is one luxury item you feel is worth the price?
Travel. I've always had Wonderlust, a bit of Wonderlust, and I want to go explore, see, do. And I think if you have the means or you can like save the means to do that, everyone should do that. Should spend some time traveling.
Love it. Who is your favorite person or group to follow on social media?
Oh my God. I follow such a variety of food bloggers to runners. You know who I actually really like to follow on Instagram is Allie Feller. She does Allie on the Run podcast. She just has like, she's funny. She brings like her quirky self into it, but then also shares and uplifts the stories of so many amazing athletes out there that I just love her balance. And I've actually, fun fact, I've met a few friends in real life that are definitely my friends because of they've been on her podcast.
I love that. Well, I should also mention that, and I didn't warn you of this, but these are questions that I have picked from you. So I'm just giving you back the questions you've asked. Oh gosh, Carolyn, is there anything else that you want to share with us about Wazelle or about any advice that you wish that you had when you were younger? Any advice you would give your younger self? Any last closing thoughts?
I would say maybe when I was a younger runner or a younger, just starting out in like the running community space, I would say to myself, get out of your bubble more. Like I said, I've always had that wanderlust, but do it within your own community too. Get to know people on the other side of the city, get to know like some cool art or music that you wouldn't necessarily go to, and really expand your horizons because not only will it make you smarter and wiser, but I guarantee you'll meet some really cool people in the process.
Yes, for sure. And where can we find out more about Oiselle and the Volée team?
Well, you can always check us out on our Wazelle page, wazelle.com. We have a whole community site dedicated to the Volée. We also have a wonderful stories site or part of our site where we tell a lot of the stories of the Volée. My personal favorite is the Who Is blogs. We feature a lot of the Volée and different voices within the Volée. So that's a great way to get to know and get a feel for us. Or you can follow the hashtag Wazelle Volée on Instagram.
And I will have all of those resources in our show notes. Carolyn, thank you so much for sharing so much with us today. There are so many takeaways that I'm really excited to share about your approach to community building, which has been said before on this podcast is our way out of some of the darker moments that we've experienced in the last year. And I believe that is actually so. It's together that we'll navigate this. And again, about Oiselle, it's an incredible company, and I really feel touched to have your voice as part of this podcast. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. This has been great.
Thank you for listening to the When Women Fly podcast. My hope is that you leave this conversation with a sense of curiosity and empowerment to hold on to what is important and let go to what weighs you down. Stare fear in the face. If you like this episode of the When Women Fly podcast, be sure to share and subscribe and let us know what you think. We love feedback. Be brave, be bold, and fly. See you next time.